Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. We're a small group tonight. There's only about 7 of us on. There were only about 10 registered, so maybe somebody else will jump on, but if they don't, that's fine. We'll have the recording for later. I am going to ask you to go ahead, even though we're a small group, and keep your microphones muted. When I stop for questions, if you think of a question and you want to type it in the chat box so you don't forget, that's fine. But since we're a small group, if you want to, when I stop to ask if there's any questions, you can unmute yourself and actually ask a question. Since we're a small group, it's a lot easier to manage. So that's fine. But like I said, feel free to go ahead and use the chat box if you have questions. And I'll be stopping a couple of times throughout the presentation to answer them. So tonight we're going to talk all about the wonder of monarch migration. Some of you may be aware, but some of you may not. I did a program on monarchs earlier in the summer that was more focused on their breeding and life cycle kinds of things. And we're going to touch a little bit on that tonight, but not very much. So we're really going to focus on migration here this evening. So if you're interested in more about their life cycle and what they're doing in the summer and all of that kind of stuff, please go to our YouTube page and look for the spring or early summer migration program that I did. So that being said, for those of you who are new to Wissahickon Trails, we are an environmental nonprofit based in Ambler, Pennsylvania. We were founded a little over 60 years ago to protect the land and water of the Wissahickon Creek. We operate largely in Montgomery County and work with our partners in Philadelphia for where the Wissahickon flows further south into the Schuylkill River. We do everything that we can up on our end, partnering with municipalities and other local organizations to keep that water as clean as possible. And part of keeping that water clean is protecting the land that surrounds the creek. So to date, we have saved nearly 1,300 acres of land from development. And on that land, we have 12 nature preserves and 24 miles of trails that are open for you to use. Since we are a nonprofit, we do depend on our supporters to help us continue our mission. So if you are a supporter that's on the call tonight, thank you from the bottom of my heart. We really do count on your support to continue the work that we're doing. And if you're not a supporter, I encourage you to go online to our website and look in detail at all the work that we're doing in land conservation and water management and all of those kinds of things, and the projects that we have going on far beyond the things that we will talk about here tonight. And hopefully that will encourage you to become a supporter as well. So real quick, our outline for tonight is I'm going to talk specifically about migration and sort of how they do it, and then a little bit about overwintering and some conservation issues. A lot of conservation issues are linked to migration and overwintering, so it seems like a good place to sort of talk about that. And then talk to you about some of the research projects that we participate in as Wissahickon Trails and our citizen science volunteers, which you can become one as well. And I'll have information on that at the end of the presentation. So let's just set the stage. This is an absolutely fantastic migration. I did a Google map here from Crossways Preserve to the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve in Mexico, which we'll talk more about, but basically where the monarchs end up. And a monarch that leaves from our Crossways Preserve travels approximately 2,100 miles from Crossways to Mexico on its migration. It could shorten that distance a little bit if it chooses to fly directly over the Gulf of Mexico, which some of them do, but a lot of times they stick to the land. It's safer and it's a known kind of thing. A monarch weighs a half a gram. So just to put that in perspective, here are some common things that weigh 1 gram. So the monarch weighs half of a paperclip, half of a US dollar bill, half of a thumbtack. So the fact that this tiny little creature can travel 2,100 miles, and there are monarchs coming from Canada that are traveling closer to 3,000 miles by the time they get to the migratory or the wintering grounds in Mexico. It is an absolutely fantastic migration. The rate that they fly on migration is about 20 to 30 miles a day, roughly. We estimate that it takes about 2 months for monarchs to get through their migratory pathways. But monarchs have been shown to fly over 150 miles in a day if the wind is blowing in the right direction. And how we know that is from tag recoveries, which is one of the projects we're going to talk about and one of the projects that you can get involved in with us in the future. And there's an example of a monarch that was tagged in Cape May, New Jersey on October 9th. And it was recovered October 12th in Harlem, Georgia. And it had traveled 558 miles in 3 days. So it's pretty fantastic. And there are a lot of variables: temperature, wind, the wind amount, the wind direction, storms. All of those things are going to impact the speed of migration. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those specifically as we go through. But I just wanted to set the stage because it absolutely, really, truly is a fantastic phenomenon. And you'll see we know a lot, but there's still a lot we don't know. So lots of areas for research and lots of areas for people to help participate and learn more about this phenomenon. So I'm going to do a really quick overview of the life cycle just so everybody's on the same page in case you haven't heard this before, and my apologies if you have heard this before. But monarchs have a life cycle where adult female butterflies will lay eggs on the milkweed leaves. Milkweed is the only thing that monarch caterpillars will eat. So it is imperative that the females lay their egg on milkweed plants. The caterpillars will hatch, eat the milkweed, growing and shedding their skin 5 times until they form a chrysalis. And that chrysalis then lets them complete their development into a butterfly. That whole process takes about a month. It's about 2 weeks as an egg and caterpillar, and then about 2 weeks as a chrysalis. That is influenced by temperature and the time of year as well. So like this time of year when there's caterpillars still out there actually on milkweed, they may go through that process a lot faster because they know it's time to migrate. Likewise, if it gets cooler, it can actually take them longer to complete this cycle. And we have several generations of butterflies, of monarch butterflies throughout a summer. And I'm going to start with the stage that we're in right now, because this is where we're going to get to the migration. So we are in the 4th generation of monarchs for this year. The first generation are essentially the children of monarchs from Mexico. And we'll understand how that completely works as a cycle if you haven't heard this before. But monarchs that migrate this year won't breed until next year. And this generation that we're in right now is a very special generation because most adult monarch butterflies only live about 2 to 6 weeks as an adult butterfly. So 4 weeks maybe on average. This last generation that we have right now and the ones that are migrating to Mexico, this generation is special. They live 8 to 9 months. They are not driven by the same urge to reproduce that all of the other generations are driven by. This generation actually won't breed until next spring, March, April timeframe. They're actually physiologically different from the monarchs that we have seen around all summer. These differences allow them to fly. They have thicker abdomens that allows them to hold more fat. They have larger and better adapted wings for flying compared to the non-migratory populations. And interestingly enough, the females are often found to be better flyers than the males. Their wings are shaped better for migration, and they typically have an overall lighter body weight, which just makes it easier for them to use the wind to get further south. And one study of migratory monarchs actually showed that they consumed less oxygen and had lower metabolic rates when they were flying than non-migratory. And so those adaptations are going to allow them to fly long distances. So they really are a very special generation of butterflies. And most of these are born in the August timeframe, and then begin in our area to, they are emerging from their chrysalises, around August timeframe. But again, that's a byproduct and a factor of weather, how many monarchs have laid eggs, how much milkweed is available. And so we are actually still seeing caterpillars now that are going into chrysalis. And so it'll take them about 2 weeks, and then they'll start migrating as soon as they come out. Yes, okay. I don't want to spend a ton of time on the life cycle because there's a whole other presentation on that. So please feel free to go take a look at that if you want more information. Just to give you an overview of migration, I already showed you, our Google map that shows we're going to Mexico, kind of northwest of Mexico City. But this map sort of gives you an overall view of what happens to monarchs across the year and across the country. So let's start up in Canada. This dotted green line is the limit at which milkweed can grow. So above this dotted green line, there's no milkweed and there's no monarchs. Below this dotted green line, there are milkweed and monarchs everywhere across the US except for the Pacific Northwest. There's no milkweed there. I don't know entirely why, but there's not. Generally speaking, all of the population of monarchs east of the Rockies, so this big part of the country, all the way over to us, all the way up into Canada, everything east of the Rockies migrates to Mexico. Everything west of the Rockies tends to migrate to the California coast and spend the winter there. Now, there is some crossover. Some monarchs from west of the Rockies end up in Mexico, and some of our butterflies don't actually make it all the way to Mexico. There is a non-migratory population in the tip of Florida, and some monarchs, particularly monarchs that are born along and develop along the eastern seaboard, may not make the journey all the way to Mexico. They may fly to Florida for the winter. It's faster, it's easier. It's a lot less an arduous journey, and they'll spend the winter in Florida and then breed in the spring with a non-migratory population. So there's a little bit of variation, but by and large, pretty much the vast majority of the population of monarchs east of the Rockies ends up in Mexico. These wintering grounds were not actually discovered until 1975. This was a 38-year research project done by a Canadian researcher to try to understand where the monarchs went when they disappeared from his house in Canada at the end of the summer. He was actually the first to recruit citizen scientists to help look for monarchs. He was the first to tag monarchs, and he then recruited those scientists and citizen scientists and volunteers to look for those tags and look for populations of butterflies flying south, is essentially the hypothesis that he had. And initially, he thought they went to the Gulf of Mexico, Texas, South Texas. Eventually, they finally figured out that where they were in Mexico and were able to find butterflies that he had tagged and completed that circle to understand what happens to all the butterflies in the winter. It is still unclear what prompts the southern migration. It seems like day length, temperature, all of those things are clues. Winds out of the north, which tend to happen more this time of the year, all of those things could be a clue for monarchs. We actually understand really well what prompts their northward migration in the spring, but we really don't understand what actually makes them move in the fall. So that's still an ongoing area of research. And it's probably more than one thing. It's probably a combination of factors. We do know that they like to migrate when the temperatures are in the 60 to 70 degree range. They don't like to migrate on really, really hot days. And they will often ride the leading edge of a cold front. So the air in front of a cold front is still warm air, and that just helps push them. Those cold fronts are typically coming down out of Canada, and that helps push them in the right direction. The altitude of their flight really actually depends on the wind direction. They have been spotted at altitudes of up to 11,000 feet by glider pilots during migration times. But if the wind is from the south, the monarchs will stay at a lower elevation. If the wind is out of the north and generally flowing at a good clip, that pushes monarchs south, and they often tend to fly very high. So on favorable winds, we may not actually really see them come down. Monarchs are often counted at hawk watches because they tend to fly over with the birds, and they don't touch down until late in the afternoon, when they will take cover and shelter for the night. One of the phenomenon that monarchs can do, now every monarch will take cover at night in some kind of a roost. Usually they're by themselves. Monarchs don't migrate as a group, even though we see great concentrations of them. We don't know if they're actually seeking each other out, or they all just end up in the same spot because they're moving in the same direction. Birds actually do physically form flocks to migrate, and monarchs don't seem to do that we can definitively say. So monarchs will come down during the late afternoon, often to eat, look for a nectar source, find a sheltered place to spend the night. But if the winds are really coming strong from the south, they won't fly at all anymore. And during these times, they can actually just sort of mysteriously accumulate. And again, we don't know if they're attracting each other and saying, hey, it's safe here, come down, come roost with us, or if they're all just looking for those same microclimate conditions, and so just all end up in the same place. But what happens is they all tend to clump together, and they look for areas of trees that are protected from the wind and that have nectar sources nearby. These roosts often also tend to form near water for some reason. And again, nobody's entirely sure why. Some of these roosts are very short-lived. They could last one night. Sometimes they last a night or two as the monarchs, take use of the nectar sources nearby and fuel up for the rest of their journey. But sometimes if the weather's really bad, they can last a week or more, and more monarchs will just keep getting added to the mix. They tend to clump together like this picture shows on branches. Some believe it can be a protection from to keep them warm. They'll huddle together when temperatures are cooler. Body heat from each of them helps all of them stay warmer, so they're more protected that way. Also, typically, higher numbers of things that stay together have a little bit better safety from potential predators. And there are birds and other things that will eat monarchs, even though they do have an accumulation of the toxic compounds from the milkweed in their system. There are a number of birds and other predators that have figured out how to get around that. And so they can be predated when they're just at rest, and particularly if it's really cold and they can't fly away. So again, we don't completely understand why these happen, but they very frequently do. And mostly it's weather driven. And so this is something that I urge you to sort of keep a lookout for if you pay attention to the weather. And if you want to see concentrations of monarchs, you kind of have to pay attention to the weather, because as I said, if the wind's coming out of the north, it's going to keep them very high. You're going to see them flying overhead, but they're not going to come down at any great level for you to really enjoy. Southerly winds are going to force them down. And so paying attention to those winds and bad weather can also help you sort of seek out those roosts as they might form. I'm going to mention this now, but I'll bring it up again at the end. There is a website online called Journey North. And even though we're talking about a journey south, they do track monarch migration. They track the journey north in the spring, but they also track the migration south in the fall. So you can go in and enter sightings of migrating butterflies. You can go in and enter the location of a roost if you happen to find one. And I would, if this is just a, an aside, if you find a roost, please let me know. Even if it dissolves, the next morning, you're typically going to find these in late afternoon, early evening is when they're going to start forming. Please feel free to reach out to me and let me know, if the location is accessible. One, I'd love to get photographs of it, and it would be great just to document that it happened in the area of the watershed. If it's on one of our properties, great. It doesn't have to be. Again, we're just trying to understand those microclimate conditions that might be attracting them and how we could possibly form them on some of our other preserves. So how to get to Mexico? So remember back, I said there's a number of generations, and I kind of skipped over a lot of detail there, but essentially, these are the great-great-grandchildren of last year's migrants. So they've never seen Mexico. Their parents aren't here to get them to Mexico. Like in some other migrating species, it's the parents that actually lead their offspring on the first migratory journey. This is all instinct. And as I said, they're pretty much all on their own as well. We tend to see large concentrations of them in certain areas, but they're not performing the same kind of flocking behavior as birds do to migrate. So this is all instinct. This is somehow embedded in each individual monarch's genetics, somehow. And if you think about it, in order to get to Mexico, they need to be able to kind of do three things. One is they need to be able to travel in the proper direction. They need to be able to course correct if necessary. And they have to know that they've arrived at the right place at the end of the journey. And despite all the years that people have been studying monarch migration, we still don't have all the answers. And there's a lot of key things that we don't have answers to. And we're going to go into that a little bit, as we go through this, and I'll talk about what we do know, but you'll see where some of those gaps are. And there are non-migratory populations. The non-migratory population in Florida, for example, is a good comparison to the migratory monarchs in the rest of the country. But there's also monarchs in other parts of the world. There's monarchs in Australia and New Zealand. There's monarchs in Europe. And nobody's entirely sure how they got there. It's possible that they actually flew there at one point in time. And they've now created isolated non-migratory populations. So researchers have been studying the genetics of those populations that don't migrate versus our population that does migrate. And they found over 500 different genes between the migratory and the non-migratory populations. Some of them are like really obvious. There was one majorly key different gene that was related to muscle function, which actually kind of made sense if you think about the fact that our population's migrating. So it makes sense that their muscles may work a little bit differently. But looking at those genetic differences so far hasn't been able to show any kind of like map hardwired into their genes that they've been able to identify. So how do they get to Mexico? Before we answer that question, I want to step back for a minute and show you how researchers actually study flight in monarch butterflies. So they actually use what's called a flight simulator, and you can see it here, and it's basically a tall cylinder that's exposed to natural light in most cases. The butterflies are suspended within this chamber. There is a tube that blows air to encourage the monarchs to fly, and then a device that sits on top that records the direction. So the butterfly can choose how it wants to orient within this chamber to act like it's flying. Since it's tethered, it can't leave the chamber. And what researchers do is use a number of different butterflies, the same butterflies over and over again to repeat the tests, and they end up with results that can be graphed like this. Each one of these, A, B, C, D, is a separate test, and this helps you to see the orientation that the butterflies had within that test. So each parameter can give you different results. So for example, in the A sample, north is up here at the top always, south is at the bottom. These butterflies in this test of A were orienting south to southwest. In B, they were orienting south to southeast. In C, they were orienting north to northwest, more north than west. And in D, they weren't really orienting in any kind of pattern at all. And so this is what researchers use to understand sort of monarch navigation loosely. It's more orientation. And they can use this for a lot of different kinds of tests, but we're going to just talk about it for migratory purposes. So these are the kind of results that you get. Now, if you think about proper orientation, one of the things I said was that monarchs need to be able to travel in the proper direction. So they have to know that they're moving towards the right place. And if you think about how a monarch flies from our location to Mexico, they need to head, and this is true for all of the eastern monarchs, they need to head south-southwest mostly to get to the wintering grounds in Mexico. And the sun is going to move during the day as they're flying. So at 10 o'clock, flying south, the sun is going to be on the monarch's left-hand side. At noon, it's going to be directly in front of them or overhead. And at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, for example, it's going to have shifted to the right-hand side. So researchers knew that going in. They understood that, this is how the sun moves. The monarchs need to orient south-southwest. So they postulated that butterflies had some kind of sun compass that they used. And in fact, they showed that. These are the same graphs from the last slide with the actual parameters of the study listed here. So the first one is the control, no treatments done to these, and they're migrating south, or they're orienting south-southwest in the chamber, just like they should in a normal circumstance of migrating monarch butterflies. This group of butterflies in B was held in a chamber without access to sunlight. And basically they shifted the clock 6 hours earlier. So these butterflies now believe that it's not noon if you say this is noon in A, right? The arrow's pointing towards noon. Now these butterflies in B believe it's not noon, but it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So they're acting more like the sun is on their left side, and they shift their orientation. If you do the opposite and you shift the clock 6 hours later, they start actually flying north or orienting north because they're turned around. And if it's overcast, they don't really orient consistently in this study that was done. And so what they did, this actually really allowed them to show that yes, they were orienting to the sun. There's some kind of compass inside of them, and it helps them keep that south-southwest orientation. And it was in a great naming convention way known as the time compensated sun compass. There's a mouthful for you. But basically, it just means that the monarchs can use the sun to keep themselves oriented. Interestingly enough, a series of experiments that were completely unrelated to migration in these flight chambers actually indicated that a key component of this system wasn't in the brain like researchers thought it was. Everybody just assumed that all of this neural function that was going to allow them to do this orientation was just in their brain, and they're seeing the sun with their eyes and it's going into their brain, and they're able to, you know, orient properly. In actuality, and this is a very complicated picture, but we're going to simplify it really easily, part of the clock that they need to use to keep time and keep track of when they are in the sky is actually in their antenna. So they need sensory input to their eyes from the sun, they need sensory input to their antenna from the sun, and both of those signals combine in the brain with a circadian clock in the brain as well that allows them to orient properly and control the motor system to get them to fly in the proper direction. So if a monarch loses its antenna or their antenna are damaged, they will not be able to migrate properly. Now, they have shown that a monarch can migrate successfully with one fully functioning antenna. So they kind of have a built-in backup system since they have two of them, but if for some reason they're both damaged, a monarch will not be able to migrate properly. It won't know sort of when it is during the day, so it won't move in the right direction. If a monarch loses its orientation, it will actually fly in a complete circle to try to regain the proper direction in which it needs to fly. So it uses those inputs to the antenna and to the eye to come into the brain to figure out what direction do I need to fly to get to Mexico. In addition, researchers have now shown that monarchs also possess a magnetic orientation system, and I couldn't find a good diagram of that to show you. Basically, they use the same kind of chambers with magnets in them and no sunlight to see if the monarchs could orient in the right direction, and they actually do. So they're using the magnetic features of the Earth to help them orient when the sun isn't shining on cloudier days or overcast days. So that's another way that they combined with this sun compass, they can use the magnetic orientation system to make sure that they're moving in the right direction. In addition, monarch migration shares some similarities with hawk migration in the fall. I mentioned earlier that monarchs are often counted at hawk migration sites because they pass over in the same way. A lot of our birds migrate at night. Hawks are different in that they migrate during the day, as do the monarch butterflies. And so it kind of makes sense that there's a lot of similarities between them. One of the similarities between them is that they use thermals to help them move. And so basically what happens where there's a number of things can form thermals. Parking lots can form thermals of hot air coming off of the blacktop as it heats, for example. But a lot of times these thermals form on along mountain ridges. And so the warm air comes up the side of the mountain and it goes up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden it will start to cool. And what happens is birds and butterflies, they use this rising warm air to limit the amount of flight movement that they have to do. Basically, they can glide and they don't have to flap. So they save a lot of energy. They use the warm rising air to move up as high as they can until that warm air starts to disappear. They descend in a glide through the cool air until they find the next thermal that will take them back up. And hawks do this very, very frequently, and butterflies have been seen doing this as well. And it's a mechanism to save them energy. Another reason that they're very much like hawks, any bird watchers in the group will know that places like Cape May are awesome for hawk watching in the fall and migration in general, because a lot of birds sort of get trapped in the peninsula. They fly based on the northwest winds and they end up at the coast, and they're not going to go out over the ocean. So they hug that coast and they get stuck down in the very tip of New Jersey, and they either take the chance to fly over the Delaware Bay, spend the day refueling. Maybe some of them actually fly further north back a little bit backwards over to a shallower, narrower part of the Delaware River, and then fly over that way and down into Pennsylvania to continue their migratory journey. And the butterflies do the same thing. So peninsulas like Cape May, and there's a couple of other ones along the East Coast, tend to concentrate monarchs in a great fashion, partially because they get stuck there, they get pushed there by the winds, and so that is a great place for researchers to study butterflies. Unfortunately, I've learned for us in the watershed, we're in a bit of a dead spot because if the winds are proper, they're going to get pushed all the way to the coast and into New Jersey and end up in Cape May. If the winds aren't proper, chances are they're going to be in the mountains in the middle of Pennsylvania and following those ridge lines down. Now, we still get a lot of migrating monarchs, but we don't get the same numbers that places like Cape May will get, and we probably never will, just because of the geography and the way that the monarchs migrate. But there's still a lot that we can do to contribute to monarch research and to protection of the monarchs in our area. So we'll talk about that as we go through. So those two slides, I basically have now summarized everything that we know about monarch migration. We do not know how they find the same site every year. We don't understand truly how they navigate, because maintaining a compass heading is different than navigating. Imagine if I just said to you, okay, this way south, and I pointed you south and said, find the wintering grounds, and you have no map, you have no idea how to get there, you've never been there before. So that level of navigation to actually get to the same 12 mountaintops every year, we have no idea how that piece really works. We understand how they orient, we understand some of the dynamics of how the weather impacts their migration, but we still don't really understand how they navigate to get to those same spots every year. So we're going to switch now and talk a little bit about the overwintering sites themselves and what happens during, actually, I thought I had built a question in before we did this, but I'm going to stop now and see, does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat. Okay, I'm going to keep going and we'll talk. So I'm going to switch now to talking about the overwintering sites and what happens during overwintering, and I will stop again for questions at the end of this section. So either please feel free to put them in the chat if you think of something, and you can ask them in person when I stop the next time. Okay, so the eastern population of North America's monarchs overwinters in the same 11 to 12 mountain areas every year. These monarchs typically start arriving in late October. The bulk of them end up there in November, but stragglers can take up until early to mid-December, usually early December, to get there. So this is Mexico City right here, and this is what's known as the Monarch Biosphere Reserve. There are a number of different sites within that reserve. This breakout map over here with all of these monarchs and the names, these are the areas that wintering roosts of monarchs have been found. The most famous one that most people have probably heard of is El Rosario. That is kind of what prompted the formation of the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. But a couple of these other mountains tops are also in that reserve. Now, just because the monarchs have roosted here doesn't mean they're at the same sites every year, but typically there's a group of monarchs at each site every year. They tend to move around a little bit, but we'll see in a minute, the amount that they can move is actually a really small amount because they're very dependent on a particular microhabitat. So that is why they're only in these very specific locations. They do tend to move within those sites once they get there. So for example, a butterfly that actually lands in El Rosario as its starting point may actually leave El Rosario with a bunch of other butterflies and form a much larger group at one of the other sites. And the researchers call that consolidating. And it matters when the groups of butterflies consolidate, because that's how they actually end up counting them to get a population estimate. And so there is some movement that happens, but it's not a lot, and it's in a very limited geographic area. So what they are dependent upon is this OYAMEL tree. This is a large evergreen tree. You can see here on the right. This is a forest of them. They are at an elevation of 2,400 to 3,600 meters, so nearly 2 miles above sea level. These mountaintops where these trees grow provide the microclimate that the butterflies need to survive the winter. The temperatures within the tree groups, so within the forest, tend to range from about 0 to 15 degrees Celsius, or 32 to about 60 degrees when it's getting warmer in the springtime. And the humidity levels are such that the monarchs won't dry out, which allows them to conserve their energy as well. Because if they needed to replenish their own body moisture frequently, that would cause them to expend more energy. So this perfect microhabitat of survival exists within these forests of trees. We don't exactly know what causes and even like within El Rosario, for example, you can see here that there's a bunch of different groups of trees, and we don't entirely understand what causes the monarchs to choose one group of trees over another. But typically, high elevation matters for sure. Proximity to streams. Most sites are less than 400 meters away from either permanent or temporary streams. They tend to like moderately steep slopes and not really flat areas. And they like areas that are a south to southwest orientation. Probably gives them the proper sun for when the sun is out and temperatures warm up. So when we look at the wintering monarchs themselves, they tend to cluster together to stay warm. Tens of thousands of individual monarchs can cluster on a single tree. They are so numerous that they can actually be seen from the air, as you see here. So, all of this orangey area here, these are all butterflies in the trees. Having intact forest is really important because that helps protect the monarchs from getting wet in the snow and the rain. Wet monarchs in winter temperatures can freeze and die. And in fact, winter storms on the wintering grounds can kill significant numbers of monarchs. But intact forest helps protect them even more. And the grouping together like they do here in this picture also helps protect them. They're sharing body heat, they're sharing a level of protection so that some of them will survive through the winter. Monarchs do have predators on the wintering ground. There are a few bird species, such as this black-headed grosbeak, that will eat monarchs, and several mice species that actually will attack monarchs that fall to the ground. Monarchs physically can't fly at temperatures below, well, their own body temperature below 55 degrees. If they can't get their body temperature up to above 55 degrees, either through warming in the sun, they can shiver their wings to try to get themselves warmed up enough to fly. But if they can't get themselves warmed up to fly, they can't escape predators. They're essentially paralyzed on the ground if it's cold enough. And so there can be predators that will attack them. And they are surviving on their stored fat. So hanging together like this in sort of chains along the branches and the trunks of trees, they generally stay pretty quiet, and that allows them to conserve energy as much as possible. So extreme cold temperatures or moisture, like I said, will cause them, like rain or snow, will cause them to expend more energy, which they don't really want to do. On warm days, and particularly as it gets closer to springtime, the monarchs will actually take flight. And you can get phenomenal excursions of butterflies, you know, like this top picture here, and they will also start to visit the streams in the reserve areas or on the wintering grounds for water and the minerals that are in the mud at the edge of the stream. There aren't really a lot of flowers up here, and it is winter, it's cold. So there's not things, you know, things aren't growing. So there's not a lot of opportunity for them to get nectar while they're on the wintering ground. So they really are reliant on their fat stores to survive the winter. You can visit the wintering grounds. You may or may not be aware of this. There are tour companies that run trips. You can do it as an individual should you desire. El Rosario is often one of the ones you visit, and depending on the tour company, there are some other ones that you can get to. Some are easier to get to than others. They are very high up in the mountains. There are a number of locals who will lead you up the mountain while you sit on the donkey so that you don't have to climb to the top of the mountain so that you can see the butterflies. El Rosario, from what I understand, I have never been. It is a bucket list for me for sure to try to get there at some point. El Rosario is rather accessible. There are a number of paths and boardwalks and steps that have been built that make it a lot easier to get to. So that is a place where most people go to see them. You may not see them fly when you're there. It depends on the weather, the condition of the butterflies, that kind of thing. But a lot of times people do manage to see a flight day when they're there. And I just, I've seen videos of it online of the thousands of them taking flight from the trees. And it's just an amazing kind of experience, I'm sure. So definitely on my list. So lengthening days and warming temperatures for them indicate that it's time to return north. And I said earlier that we really understand what turns on their northward migration, and we do. Researchers have been able to show in migratory monarchs that are treated to a very short period, 24 days of cold temperatures in chambers that we have that they use to study these. So basically they're inside all the time and they're subjected to that cold temperature. They basically hang out just like the wintering monarchs do in Mexico. And even if they're not in Mexico, if they're treated to 24 days of those cold temperatures, like around freezing, and then they go back and look at them again and try those orientation tests, they all orient north. So it's that brief exposure to cold temperatures and then the rewarming and in the spring that flips their migratory pathway back to migrating north. They haven't been able to show that same connection for the fall migration. So interesting difference there. Okay, questions? I saw one pop up in the chat. What kind of milkweed do monarchs like best? It really depends. So most of the milkweed that's growing in our area is common milkweed, and so that tends to be what we see most of the monarchs on. But they also do like swamp milkweed. We have swamp milkweed growing in a lot of our preserves in smaller amounts, and we often find monarchs on that as well. Butterfly weed they will use, and that's one that's more people have that in their gardens because it's much better behaved than common milkweed is to like plant in your backyard garden. I've heard mixed results about whether monarchs use it or not. Some people say I've had it for years and I've never had a monarch, and other people say, oh, I planted it last year and I had 4 monarchs lay eggs this year. So it really seems to depend on the individual monarchs. What I can tell you is that monarchs tend to like new milkweed better than old milkweed. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a part of what you can do to help monarchs along, but they tend to like newer, fresher, sort of younger growth of milkweed, and they will always choose that over older plants. And I think that's more of a difference than the actual species is of milkweed. And let me be clear, those are the 3 species of milkweeds that are native to our area of Pennsylvania. Across the country, there are a whole host of other species of milkweed that are native to those particular areas. So then the milkweed species that are in Texas are different than the milkweed species that we have here. And some of the milkweed species in the upper Midwest are different than the ones we have here. And the monarchs still use those fine. So again, it kind of depends on the area that you're in. Let's see if there's any other questions. I'm not, so one popped up. Oh, somebody says we should pull the old growth and plant new every year. Nope, not quite. I'm going to explain that in a second about the growth things. And Beth commented and said butterfly weed is different than butterfly bush. It is absolutely, and I'm going to touch on that as well as we go forward. Okay, real quick, I'm going to talk about 3 conservation issues that are sort of the hot topics right now in monarch circles, so to speak. One is monarch population decline, which I could do an entire presentation on, trust me. So we're going to keep that one very high level. Talk about raising monarchs and tropical milkweed, because that's a kind of a hot topic these days. And you may have heard of it if you pay at all attention to headlines that kind of come through the popular press even. So first, monarchs are declining. I mean, that is true, no matter how we look at it. And this is actually true for a lot of insect species, and there's probably a lot of reasons why. But we're going to talk about a couple of things right now. So a couple of things to understand is monarchs are measured, the population is measured every year while they're on the wintering grounds, because in theory, at least, the vast majority of the population from the east of the Rockies is on those sites in Mexico on the wintering grounds. And so this usually happens in December, after those monarchs have come in and consolidated themselves into fairly stable colonies, and they're counted. The thing is that the individual butterflies aren't counted. And there's not really even an estimate of individual butterflies most of the time. What is measured is the area that is covered by the butterflies every year. So the level that researchers think they need to have to continue to have a migratory population at self-sustaining levels is around 5 to 6 hectares. You can see from this graph that there are a lot of years that the population that is measured is taking up a much smaller area than that. So the concern is that at these levels and that the population is not sustainable for the long term. Now, the other thing that this graph shows you is that there is a heck of a lot of variation year to year. Now, over time, if you average all this out, yes, it is a continual downward decline. But there, even in good years, there's a lot of variation. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. And part of that is what we're going to get into now. But just know that that variation is natural. Some of these things are caused by, so I know it's hard to read this graph, but this 4.02 right here is 2010-2011 winter. So this 2010 to 2014, which was this 2013-2014 was the lowest number ever of acres, of hectares that the butterflies occupied on the wintering grounds. This is part of the 100-year drought in Texas. So those butterflies were probably impacted both in the spring when they went back to Texas to breed. There wasn't enough milkweed because of the drought. And when they migrated back through in the fall, the butterflies that did migrate, there probably wasn't as much nectar plants for them to fuel up on while they were in South Texas because of the drought that occurred. So there's some things that we can see that we can sort of link to major weather events. But overall, we don't entirely understand, even back up here where things were looking pretty good, why all of a sudden one year we go down to 2.83, but then the next year we're back up to 9.35. Part of that's natural variability, but there's clearly some other things going on because if we look at the average, we definitely see a decline. Right now, there's kind of two competing hypotheses if you look at the literature in terms of understanding why monarchs are declining. And one is the idea that there's not enough milkweed for them to breed on. And this is especially true in the upper Midwest and the farm belt of our country, because that is actually the major monarch population area, is the middle of the country, from Texas up into the upper Midwest and into Canada. Yes, we have a lot of monarchs on the East Coast, but they don't actually usually compare in numbers to the amount that the Midwest gets. And it's been estimated that about 71% of potential monarch habitat was eliminated between the late 1990s and 2006 because of glyphosate-tolerant crop planting. So what happens here is farmers are planting glyphosate-tolerant seeds, corn, soybeans, and then they go out and they treat their fields with the herbicide glyphosate, and it kills any milkweed that might be growing within those rows of corn or soybeans. It increases yields for the farmer, but it wipes out all of that habitat. And so that is a huge concern, that there's just not enough milkweed. In addition, we don't have open weedy fields like we used to have in a lot of places. Development has been rampant. A lot of those weedy fields get taken over. A lot of the small farms have disappeared. So that all of those things contribute to those, what we call lack of milkweed stems. So there's one group of researchers that is focusing really on milkweed and breeding more monarchs by planting more milkweed. There's another group of people that think that it's more related to reduction in resources. So like changing conditions during fall migration, like the drought that I mentioned, or lack of nectar plants along the migration route for those butterflies. So the butterflies that are coming down from Canada need nectar plants all the way from Canada to Mexico for them to create the fat stores that they need to get through the winter. So that's really key. If migrants are dying or aren't making it to the wintering grounds, then that could be resulting in those lower wintering numbers. And then that means less monarchs are available to start the cycle again next year in the spring. Likewise, if there's a decrease in breeding monarchs, there's not as many monarchs migrating in the first place, then the wintering numbers are going to be lower, and there's going to be less monarchs to start the cycle all over again in the spring. The reality is that this is a big issue with a lot of different levels of interactions. And there's probably never going to be one thing that we can point to that says this is causing the decline of milkweed, of monarchs. There's a big part of it that is habitat loss for sure, both the breeding habitat, but also on the wintering grounds. There's illegal logging that goes on. There's less areas for the butterflies to move to if for some reason the microclimate isn't right there. Illegal logging also thins the forest, so those wintering monarchs aren't protected as well. So all of those kinds of things are impacting them. We have rampant insecticide and herbicide use in our country, both at the commercial farming level, but also homeowners are often a big culprit of this because homeowners aren't regulated. I mean, anybody can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any store that sells it and buy Roundup and spray it wherever they want in their yard. And so that herbicide is not, you know, it's there, it can contaminate things that you don't mean it to, so you can be killing plants that are used by the butterflies. Also insecticides trying to kill insects. Butterflies are insects, so any kind of insecticide that you use has the potential to kill a butterfly in the egg, caterpillar, chrysalis even, or adult stage. Butterflies can be impacted by parasites, predators, diseases, all of which could be getting worse because of climate change and warming summers and impacting the health of the butterflies in general. Climate change has storms on the wintering grounds increasing and hotter summers reducing breeding success. So you can see there's a lot of things going into this. It's probably not just milkweed, and it's probably not just reduction in resources. It's a combination of all of these things working together. And there are some things that we can do, and there are some things that are sort of moving in a positive direction, and we're going to talk about that in the last slide. So another big issue that came up last year was the impact of raising indoors. And I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole of the research around this. I'm going to lead by saying there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this area. And it's something that I follow very closely because we do our own raising efforts, and we're going to talk about that, and we have some volunteers helping us. And so I definitely don't want to be doing harm when I'm raising. So this is an area that I am very focused on. Basically, the short story is there was a publication that came out last year that said that monarchs that are raised inside don't orient properly for migration. And a lot of popular press, including NPR, went with headlines that were like, you know, monarchs raised inside can't migrate anymore. And that's not entirely true. So we need to sort of understand the basics of what happened, but then what we need to do to make sure things are safe. So a lot of the things that have been studied are related to commercial raising monarch operations. And that may sound really funny, but yes, there is actually a commercial monarch raising industry out there. You can get monarchs to release at your wedding, at your birthday party. There are monarchs, eggs or caterpillars that are sold to school children to raise. So there is a very healthy, I shall say, commercial monarch program in our country. Those butterflies are raised in situations like this picture, very far from your garden. They're raised with 12-hour artificial light sources on, off, no access to natural sunlight. They are kept at a constant temperature, a constant humidity. And these butterflies may actually be the second or third generation of butterflies that were raised completely indoors. So their parents or grandparents may never have seen the sun either. So all of this to say is that the commercial raising operations are often a very artificial situation in a lot of respects, and very unlike what most people do in their own homes. And a lot of these studies, when they were released, they had a few wild caterpillars that they captured from a milkweed plot outside and then raised indoors. In one study, the number of those caterpillars was 9. And then they went and said, well, you shouldn't raise indoors because they aren't orienting in the chamber right for migration. And 9 butterflies to me does not constitute a significant number of butterflies. So there's some things that we need to take away from this, but we know that tags have been recovered in Mexico from monarchs that were raised, because when we report, and I'll talk about this in a minute, when we report our tagging information, we have to tell the organization that collects that data whether or not the butterfly that we're tagging, putting a tag on, was raised or was a wild-caught adult butterfly. And we know that tags have been recovered from Mexico, so we know that they're migrating. Are there differences in the number of wild versus raised butterflies that have been recovered in Mexico? Yes, but there are a lot of issues with tag recoveries in Mexico, so it may not be the fact that they're raised or not. And it's a complex and evolving area of research. The biggest takeaway that I can give you is that it's important to understand and remember, we're not going to solve the monarch decline issue by raising them inside and letting them go. We're talking millions of butterflies that are needed to try to get back to levels that we're seeing 20 or 30 years ago. And it's just not feasible to think about raising all of those indoors in a manner that is going to significantly increase the population. But what I can say, and this is where I actually do recommend, if you have milkweed in your yard, raise a butterfly. Bring a caterpillar indoors, look for an egg, bring a couple of them in. It is a great opportunity to see the entire life cycle up close and personal in a way that's hard to see in your garden because the caterpillars move. You can't always find where they put their chrysalis to hang out for 2 weeks. So you're not going to hurt anything by having a couple of butterflies that you raise inside. And it really is going to, I think, help you understand the process. But know that raising hundreds of them every year is not going to help the population. And in fact, that actually may be hurting. There are people out there that are raising hundreds of them in a summer, often in very overcrowded situations like this. And if you're going to raise them, I recommend that you follow the best practices, which is each caterpillar gets its own individual container, and they spend their development separated from the other caterpillars that you have to help prevent spread of disease, help prevent the spread of parasites from one to another. And this way you'll know if one is sick, it's easy to isolate, versus in a situation like this, if you have one sick caterpillar in here, all of these caterpillars are going to be dead. If you have one sick chrysalis in here, it is a really good chance that almost all of these caterpillars that you see, or the butterflies that come out of these chrysalises, are going to be contaminated as well. And then you let them go and they're going to spread that into the wild. So if you're interested in raising, please reach out to me and contact me, because I'm absolutely happy to share with you the best practices for how to safely raise them so that you can enjoy them and see them and participate in that process, because it is really fun. I have monarchs in my house right now. This is a container with a chrysalis that should be out in, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days. It should be about that time. So take this off and he's just hanging out there, or she, not entirely sure yet. And because I know now is the migration time, when this one comes out, it will get tagged and contribute to that. Last one real quick, tropical milkweed debate. This is one that there's a lot of information online, and so if you go to search milkweed for butterflies, you are likely to run into this. So that's why I wanted to include it here. This is a milkweed species that is not native to our area, and I just realized I forgot to put the actual species name on here, and I don't remember what it is right off the top of my head. I can find that for you if you're interested. But the point is that this is not a milkweed that is native to our area. In fact, it's not even really native to the United States. It grows in Mexico and places further south. And there is some thoughts that particularly in places along the Gulf Coast, in Texas, in Florida, where people have this, it may actually be contributing to the spread of OE, which is a protozoan disease. It's a protozoan parasite, actually, that monarchs can spread to each other. It will live on the milkweed branches and leaves. And so if a butterfly has it, it sheds it onto that plant. Any other butterfly, caterpillar that comes along can pick up those spores and then becomes infected themselves. The issue with it is that two things. One is it tends to be preferred by monarchs in areas where it is offered because the leaves are more tender and there's less latex in them, so it's easier for monarchs to eat. So if you plant this and you also have common milkweed, chances are the butterflies will actually go to the tropical milkweed, which is not necessarily a good thing. It also tends to bloom longer than our native milkweeds. So it may actually potentially be interfering with migration because it stays longer in the environment. The butterflies think that they can still lay eggs, and so they won't migrate. Now, for us right now, currently, this can't survive our winters, but warming trends could change this. The areas of the US that it can survive the winters is slowly spreading up from Florida into the Carolinas and that kind of area. So my recommendation is don't grow it. Our native milkweed can still get contaminated with the OE spores, but the butterfly, it dies back in the winter. And so the butterflies are going to be gone, our native milkweed dies back, and the spores will die along with it. And so you won't have that ongoing contamination issue. If you have a milkweed like this one that continues to grow all year long, those spores are staying in the environment all year. And you add in a non-migratory population, for example, in southern Florida, and they can just continually be spreading this disease or the parasite. My recommendation is don't grow it. There's the three milkweed species that I listed earlier, the common milkweed, the swamp milkweed, which is actually fairly well behaved in a garden, the swamp milkweed, even if you don't have a very wet area. It doesn't like really, really dry areas, but oftentimes you can amend the soil a little bit to make it hold water a little bit more, and the swamp milkweed will do just fine. And then the butterfly weed, which I think I have a picture of in an upcoming slide. All of those are going to be fine and used by the butterflies. Here's what I said. So the issue of blooming longer in our gardens, common milkweed tends to be the first one to bloom, and it can bloom really fast and be gone, and then the leaves get really old and gross, and the butterflies don't want to lay eggs on them. What you can do in your own garden is right before the milkweed flowers. So you'll start to see the flower buds come up. And before they open, cut it back. Take your pruning shears and cut it back to like ground level. You won't kill the plant. You don't want to do every milkweed in your garden because it's possible that there still already could be some eggs or caterpillars out there that you might not have seen yet. So you don't want to get rid of all their food. But maybe a quarter, maybe a half of your milkweed, depending on how much you have, cut it back. It will regrow, but now it's behind the other milkweed. So now you'll have a batch of milkweed that has smaller, tenderer leaves that the butterflies may use more, and the flowers will last longer, so the plant will last longer into the season. You can do the same thing with swamp milkweed. Common milkweed, it works really well. The butterfly weed is a little bit harder because that tends not to get as big to begin with. So it's a little bit harder to sometimes catch that at a, a good pace to do that. But swamp milkweed, common milkweed, absolutely, you can give it a haircut. One of the things that I would also say is don't dispose of your cuttings. Don't take those cuttings and like put them in your compost bin or put them in a bag or put them out on the street or anything like that. Leave them where you've cut them, because if there are eggs that haven't hatched yet, or there are small caterpillars on there that you didn't see, as those milkweed cuttings die, those caterpillars will crawl off onto the stuff that you left, and they'll still be able to survive. So you don't want to throw those cuttings away, because you might actually be throwing away small caterpillars. But that technique will help the milkweed last longer in your garden throughout the season. And make your garden more appealing to the monarchs for the whole summer. Okay, questions? I don't see any in the chat right now. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're more than welcome to right now. Okay, I'm going to proceed forward. We're talking about the research projects that we're involved in and that you can help become involved in as well in a number of different ways. So right now we're pretty much involved in 4 as an organization. These are all, they're all pretty much national projects at this point. So, and somewhat international projects as well, because some of them go obviously up into Canada where the monarchs are. The first is the Monarch Larval Monitoring Project, and this is a project literally of going out into the field and counting the milkweed plants that are on a site, monitoring weekly for eggs, caterpillars, adult butterflies, and other insects that are using the milkweed plants. Ideally, we're getting out there early enough in the season that we can monitor when the milkweed actually emerges. We have rain gauges out there to look at moisture levels at the site. This part of this project just started this year, which because of the COVID restrictions, we didn't have a lot of volunteers. So this was me doing this year. And I certainly did not do as thorough a job as I would have liked because it was almost 600 milkweed plants and it was really hard for me to do it by myself. So this is an area where for the future, I am certainly looking for volunteers. And now that I've done it for a season and I kind of know the in and outs, it's actually easier for me to train people to do it. So this is something to keep in mind for next year. If you are willing to come and help out once, twice, the better part of the season, whatever, we'll talk about how to let me know that at the end, but this is an active project that I'm looking for volunteers for next year and moving forward as well. In addition, if you have an area where you have milkweed, and I forget how many plants they actually want you to have, if you have a certain number of stems, you could actually do this project in your own backyard as well. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email and I can get you pointed in the right direction. And I would be curious to know if you do that, just let me know that you have a site going on as well. I don't need your data or anything like that, but I'm curious to know if we have other sites going around the area, because that helps me as well in terms of understanding what's going on our site. I have other local people then to check with and say, hey, have you seen monarchs yet? Because this year the monarchs were really late getting here. Much later than they were in previous years. Weather, all kinds of things, the lower populations in Mexico to start the next generations, all of those kinds of things impact when they get here. But then that also impacts how many we see laying eggs and how many caterpillars we find. So all of those things are connected. The other thing that we do is migration tagging, which I'm going to talk about that next. Project Monarch Health is a 2-part project. It's one part of it is testing for OE, that protozoan parasite that I was talking about. And the other is looking for late stage caterpillars. So down here in this red circle, there is a big caterpillar on this leaf, or lack of, it's pretty much a leaf stem on this milkweed plant. We collect these late stage caterpillars, and these help us monitor for parasite loads in the population. And that's where this caterpillar came from, and the few others that I have in my house now. They were 4th and 5th instar, so the biggest stage of caterpillars that I collected from our site. And then this M3 Monarch Migration Study, this is a new one. We just started participating this year. This is actually a brand new study that's going on. And to find my notes, M3, it's from the University of Michigan, and M3 stands for Michigan Micro Moat. They claim to have built the world's smallest computer, and that's what the Michigan Micro Moat is. Ultimately, this tiny little computer will allow them to tag monarchs and collect data literally on an individual monarch's migratory path. In order to make this happen, and I have to admit, I don't completely understand all the ins and outs of this. Right now, they're just simply collecting environmental data. So we have this sensor at one of our sites where it collects temperature and light data. I think it also collects air pressure data as well. And I go weekly and download the data from that sensor to my phone and then upload it to their Google Drive. And they're using that data to help train their computer system to learn what sort of the background temperature light looks like for when they put these sensors on the butterflies. My ultimate goal in participating in this project is that hopefully someday, maybe we'll get to put sensors on our own butterflies and send them to Mexico, which would just be too cool. I don't know if that's really going to happen, but it's no big deal for me to go out weekly during the migration season, which is about 2 months from the beginning of September into October, and then download the data for them right now. So with the hope that maybe someday we'll get sensors put on our butterflies. So that's a new one for this year. So stay tuned for that one. But again, that is actually something that potentially could use a volunteer. They may want us to put more sensors out. Even this sensor, to have a volunteer go out weekly and do the download onto their phone and upload the data would be awesome, because it's one less thing that I have to worry about with all of the other projects going on. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved. Monarch tagging is one of them. So this is me giving a monarch tagging demonstration, and the picture there are some intrepid volunteers with their butterfly nets who helped actually collect some of the butterflies that were tagged last year. This is a program that's run by Monarch Watch. We purchase the tags every year. Everybody that tags has to purchase the tags every year. The money from us buying the tags actually goes to help pay the folks in Mexico to find the tags on butterflies and recover them. So they actually get paid to do that. And that helps the researchers, connect the date. But basically, what we do is we record data on the date, the location, whether the butterfly is a male or a female, and whether it's a wild-caught adult butterfly or a reared butterfly that we are tagging and releasing. Our peak abundance in this area is supposed to run from about the 8th to the 20th of September, according to Monarch Watch. I'm here to tell you they are totally wrong. Maybe at one point in time, that's when it was. I have yet, now, okay, granted, I've only been doing this for 3 years. I have yet to see the peak of our monarchs move through that early in September. We're basically we're now at the 15th of September, and I've hardly seen any monarchs moving. Part of that's weather. Part of it's climate change, part of it's breeding cycle because they were late this year. So it's a whole host of things. But I think that those dates are actually changing a little bit. But typically we start any adult butterflies we see after around the last week of August, the 1st of September, all the way until we don't see butterflies anymore in October, we will tag. So this program's been going on for a while, but the best data exists from 1998 to 2015. And the reason why they only have data through 2015, I'll explain in a minute. But from 1998 to 2015, people have tagged, volunteers have tagged more than 1.38 million monarch butterflies. 1% of those butterflies are recovered in Mexico. So you can see the recovery rate is not very high, but what that tells us is, well, a couple of things, but tagging more monarchs and hopefully increasing that recovery rate in Mexico is going to help us understand that migration even more. And then projects like the potential for putting an actual computer chip on a monarch that can track its actual physical location and understand how it migrates a little bit better. Those kinds of things are really going to help us understand this. So I know that my project description of this said I was going to have video. I apologize, I do not have video. And part of the reason I don't have video is because we haven't found any monarchs yet. The 4 days that I had an opportunity to get out, to have somebody with me to help video this, literally we found no adult monarch butterflies. And I laugh, I'm kind of sad. It's not a good thing. It's not funny, but it's the way this year has been as well, in terms of any time we try to go do something, it just doesn't seem to work. What I do have are a whole lot of pictures that I hope will, if you've never seen the tagging process, will explain to you what we do. And then, again, this is an area where we have opportunities for volunteers to help in future years. So if this is something that sounds intriguing to you, please, stay tuned. So once we catch a butterfly in a net like these women have here, we store them in these envelopes. These are glassine envelopes that like stamp collectors use to protect stamps and things like that. They're not sealed or anything like that. We just fold the flap over, and they can be stacked inside a pencil box. Actually, I'm going to back up for just a second. So this blue box down here, this is actually the pencil box that I'll put those envelopes in to protect them so they can't get bent, they can't get squashed, anything like that. They actually go into a cooler with an ice pack in the bottom of it. I don't freeze the butterflies, but that cool temperature helps them stay calm and protects them from any kind of overheating that they might have while I'm waiting to catch more so that I can process them all at the same time. These envelopes don't have it because I hadn't started doing it yet, but now I actually note on the envelope in a Sharpie what plant we caught the monarch on. So one of the things that I want to do is keep track of what flowering plants they're using on our preserves during migration when I get them, or what plants they're roosting on if I find a roost that I'm collecting butterflies from. And I have found roosting butterflies on some of our preserves. I haven't found roosts of like hundreds or thousands of butterflies. I found roosts of like 1 or 2 butterflies. But if I go out early enough in the morning on a cool morning, they won't have started flying yet. And I can literally sometimes just gently take them off of the tree for tagging purposes. So that I like to keep track of that now, because understanding that is going to help our land management team understand what plants we need to make sure we have, what plants we need to protect, and what plants we should spread to other preserves to help increase their popularity for migrating monarchs. So right now I can tell you that goldenrod and boneset are the 2 plants that we have the most, that I find the most butterflies on, but we do have some areas of preserves that are starting to grow a little bit more of asters and ironweed, and I'm curious to see if they are more popular than the goldenrod or boneset once those patches get a little bit more established. So once I catch as many butterflies as I feel like I'm going to be able to catch in the period that I'm out there, usually I can tell, if there's any more flying around, I'll keep trying to catch them. Sometimes you miss, you don't catch everyone on the first try. So, I keep my eyes peeled and give it whenever I feel like I've gotten the most I can get, and then I will take them back and begin processing them all together. It's easier than doing it one at a time. So the processing station is usually the back of my car or sitting on the ground when I'm doing a group, but this kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. So for each butterfly, I do the following. I note the location that we caught the butterfly. So usually I'm just like, here you can see, it may be hard to read, but it says Dodsworth. So this was our Dodsworth Preserve. So all these butterflies listed here came from this day of collecting butterflies. So date, location. For each individual butterfly, I assess the condition of the butterfly. So I have two scales of 0 to 5, where I'm looking at, one scale is just about sort of just the overall condition of the butterfly. Is it missing pieces of its wing because it's been attacked? And then the other one looks at sort of the color and brightness. Is it fresh? Is it new? Is it really faded? And if I find butterflies that are really faded or are missing pieces of their wing, even if I've caught them, because sometimes you don't see that when you're trying to catch it, I won't tag them. Those are probably the remnants of the last generation, and they won't make it to Mexico. I'm looking for fresh, new, very intact butterflies that I'm sure, have a chance of making it all the way to Mexico, and that they're part of the migratory population. So I assess the overall condition of the butterfly. I measure its forewing length. So in this butterfly here that's on top in the envelope, the forewing is this pointy wing that sticks out here at the top. This smaller rounded one is actually its hind wing. So this is in the back when it flies, and this pointy one is in the front when the wings are open and it's flying. To measure the forewing, I start down here at the base of the wing. Basically, it's the joint between the head and the abdomen is where that wing starts. And I measure to the apex of the wing. So the furthest point out here. It's not exactly a straight line across the edge of the wing because of the rounded, but I'm going to the furthest point away here on the wing. These measurements can range from about 46 millimeters to 52 millimeters on butterflies, but migratory monarchs tend to be at the upper end of that range, so 49 to 51, 52 millimeters. And again, this is kind of just a good double check on making sure that I have a migrating butterfly and not just a nice looking one. Now I will probably still tag a nice looking one that's a little bit smaller because there is variation, but again, it's just a good double check. In addition, there are a number of projects out there that do collect this at their individual sites, so places like Cape May and some of the other larger stopover sites. And my hope in making sure that I have the most complete data set as possible is that if there's ever an opportunity to partner with any of those other sites for trying to understand parts of monarch migration, that we will have already been collecting that data going forward. I take a belly scale sample for the Monarch Project Health, which I'm going to show you in more detail, but that's this card here. These are all belly scale samples. More detail, hold that thought. I note if the butterfly is male or female, and then I attach a tag to the discal cell of the hind wing. So all of the tags go on the smaller rounded hind wing. And if you look at the butterfly in the envelope, you can see this large area here. It kind of looks like a mitten. This is what's called the discal cell. And this is the best place to put the tag so that it doesn't interfere with the monarch's flight at all. These tags are just simply adhesive stickers. They're polypropylene, so they're waterproof. You put it on, you hold gently for a couple of seconds to just make sure that it is adhered to the butterfly, and then you let the butterfly go. Each tag has a unique identification. So it's, I'm sorry that this one is upside down, but it's 4 letters and 3 numbers. And mine, you get tags in a series, so pretty much all of mine would have the same letters, and then the numbers just are in increments of 1 for the amount of tags that I would have purchased for a year. At the end of the season, I report all of the tagging data to Monarch Watch, and they put it into one big giant database with everybody else's data, which researchers then use to understand. You know, it is sort of a measure of migratory population. It's not an exact measure because not every monarch butterfly gets tagged. You can imagine I am not out there every day as much as I would like to be during the migration season. So there are a lot of monarchs that come through our area that are not tagged, but it is an estimate of the levels of monarchs in the environment during migration. Again, understanding the tag recoveries in Mexico is going to help understand overall migratory patterns. And you can actually participate in this project in a couple of ways. Next season, I will certainly be looking for volunteer taggers for a number of different kinds of projects, either coming to help me on a somewhat regular basis as you are able to do collect butterflies in the field and help tag them. But the other part of it is if you have an area where you have milkweed or you have access to milkweed, where not just milkweed, if you have access to where you're seeing monarchs in the fall nectaring or roosting, let me know, because I can provide you with tags, and then all of our data would get submitted together. That way you don't have to purchase tags, and we can submit all the data together for our general watershed area. And I'm more than happy to work with people on that as a project as well, because the more tags that we can get on the butterfly, the more we're helping with this project. But you can also participate simply by, if you see a tagged butterfly, you're out bird watching, you're out taking a walk and you have a camera, your phone, and you see a butterfly with a tag on its wing, take a picture of it, make a note. You don't have to submit the pictures. Sometimes it's just easier to take a picture so that you remember that you saw the butterfly, but write down the tag number. Go to monarchwatch.org online, and there is a spot for you to report a tag sighting. Monarch Watch collects these sightings as well. They call them domestic sightings as opposed to the recoveries on the wintering grounds. And again, they help researchers understand the migratory pathway of a butterfly, because, for example, you could be out on one of our preserves and you could see a tagged butterfly. That's one that I did, but you could also see a tagged butterfly that came all the way from Canada. And trust me, taggers love to see their tags in the database as saying somebody saw them. And because only 1% of those tags were recovered in Mexico, and it's even lower recovered as domestic recoveries in the States on the migratory path, anytime you see a monarch with a tag on it, please be sure to try to report that. And pay attention in the fall, September to October timeframe, pay attention to see if you see tagged butterflies. The other project that we participate in is the Project Monarch Health, like I said, and I already brought up OE, and I probably should have put this in at the beginning of that conversation. This is the Latin name for OE. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this because every time I do, I just get it wrong. So we just call it OE for short. It is a protozoa that is a parasite on monarchs. And basically, the spores are scattered on, dormant spores can be scattered on milkweed leaves, and when a caterpillar crawls over them and eats that milkweed, they can ingest them. Butterflies can carry the spores on their wings, on their belly scales, and they can shed them onto milkweed, they can shed them onto other butterflies, like if they're in a roost. And so it's really important. This particular parasite used to be much more of an issue only in the southern part of the country, and researchers believe that that was more related to humidity levels. It survived better there in its spore state in the environment. It's spreading, and it's probably spreading because our climate is changing a little bit, and we're having hotter summers, humidity levels are changing, those kinds of things. Tropical milkweed tropical milkweed may be contributing to the spread of it as well, because it stays in the environment longer and may impact more butterflies that way. So what we do is we actually take these tiny little clear, you can see it in this person's hand if you look really carefully, there's tiny little clear round stickers. You can use a piece of Scotch tape too. And basically gently press it onto the abdomen of the monarch, and pulling it away will take some scales from the butterfly. Not enough that it's going to impact their ability to survive. And so, and they ask us, like, we are limited to 24, 26, not very many butterflies. So I could purchase 500 tags and tag 500 butterflies if I could find 500 butterflies in our area. I could still only submit data to this project on 24 of those butterflies. And so that helps limit, you know, the amount of exposure that we're giving to these butterflies in terms of not everyone's getting a belly scale taken from it. But we stick the stickers on an index card and mail that to the researchers in Georgia. And they then put them under the microscope and they look for scales, which I have a picture of here. And they look at the scales and they look to see if they have spores. So all of these kind of translucent, there's some dark ones here because they're black, but these are all the scales of the butterfly from its belly. This is actually one that I did. And all these tiny little black dots, these are OE spores. So this butterfly was actually very heavily infected with OE. This was a butterfly that was migrating through. This was an adult wild-caught butterfly. This was not one that we raised. This was one that we captured, you know, on a preserve and tested. This is the only positive test that we have had since we've been doing this project. So yeah, but that's what it looks like. So, and all these spores are kind of dormant, but what they do is once a butterfly is infected, so it can impact the way they replicate themselves. So if a larva, a caterpillar, consumes the spores, the parasites are inside, and then it's unlikely that that butterfly is actually going to emerge successfully from its chrysalis. Oftentimes they come out with very bent or folded wings that they are unable to straighten. They actually can become stuck in their chrysalis and they're too weak to fully expand their wings and they die. But as they're doing that, they're shedding the spores for the next generation of OE to potentially impact other butterflies. Sometimes butterflies can have mild OE infections and they can appear normal. So like this butterfly was actually migrating from somewhere, but typically they tend to live shorter lives. They tend not to fly as well as healthy monarchs do. So we can test adult butterflies that we catch, and then we can also test these 4th and 5th stage caterpillars that we've raised from our monarch sites, our milkweed sites, because these caterpillars have been in the environment long enough to potentially be infected. If you have an egg that you get off of a milkweed plant and you raise that caterpillar from an egg, it won't have been in the environment long enough to potentially to be exposed. So it's not a good measure. So they ask us to only measure, you know, test the older caterpillars. So I will test any of these caterpillars that I have that come out. I actually have, wait a minute, I need to get rid of, this is my good caterpillar, my good chrysalis. I want it far away from opening this. Now this one's not open yet, or not going to spread because the butterfly is technically still in the chrysalis. But I know from experience that this is not going to be a butterfly that comes out of its chrysalis. This butterfly, and I hope you can all see this, if you can see the black on the chrysalis, this chrysalis is infected with OE. So this caterpillar was infected with OE. This was a caterpillar that was collected from one of our sites. So there is OE in our environment for sure. But this black on this chrysalis means it will not become a healthy butterfly. So I will put that chrysalis in the freezer, and then I will dispose of it once it's frozen. But I know that that's OE. That's what it looks like on a chrysalis. So unfortunately, that one's not going to be a healthy butterfly. In addition, this project also, in combination with the Monarch Larval Monitoring Project, not only looks for OE, but it also looks for other parasites that might be a problem in monarch populations. So there are a couple of flies and wasps that actually lay their eggs inside of monarch eggs or caterpillars. If you've ever raised tomato plants and had the tobacco hornworm, sometimes you see those little white blobs hanging off of that big giant caterpillar, and those are actually parasitic wasps that are getting all of their nutrients from that caterpillar on your tomato plants. So it's quite the cycle, and that's exactly what happens to monarchs. So I have an example of that as well, and what happens is the wasp lays, this is actually a fly, lays its eggs inside the caterpillar, and when the caterpillar forms its chrysalis, so you can see this is a chrysalis that a butterfly is never going to come out of, because what came out of it was the pupa of the fly, which I'll show you in a second. I don't know if you can see in the video, there's a string that hangs down. That's where the pupa actually came out. And what happens is the pupa goes down. We keep paper towels in the bottom of the containers that the butterflies are in. And so this dark spot right here on the bottom, this is a fly pupa. And what I do is wait for it to hatch, and then I put the fly in the freezer, and then you can send the flies to the Monarch Larval Monitoring Project, and they actually look to sequence the genes of the flies to figure out what species it is. And through these projects from people that are participating in this, they've actually discovered 4 new species of flies that they didn't know existed before. So it's kind of cool. Not my samples weren't those new flies, but it's kind of cool to participate in this, knowing that you know, you might help find a new species of fly for whatever it's worth. The other part of it that's really fun is to go to FedEx, and when they ask you what's in the container and you're like, dead flies, they think you're really strange, but they send them. So yeah, but again, these are projects that we're operating at a scale that's big. You know, we have big sites where we're looking for these things. We have the abilities to raise them, but a lot of these are projects that you can also participate in your own backyard if you have a big enough milkweed patch. Or if you don't have a big enough milkweed patch, but you want to participate in some of these projects, talk to me, because these kinds of things, like the flies, for example, if you're raising late stage caterpillars and you have these flies that come out of your, or wasps or any other kind of parasite that come out of your chrysalises, we can join together to send those samples to make it easier, more cost effective, because even if they don't come from one of our research sites, they can be submitted as an additional observation, and that can also be really helpful. So just really quickly, our results to date. We've been doing this for 3 years, and not all parts of it for 3 years. Basically, we've been doing a little bit of raising, and we've been doing tagging for 3 years. So you can see we started out really small in 2017. We tagged just over 20 butterflies. We submitted 20 OE tests, no positive OE tests. In 2018, we doubled, plus a little bit, the amount of butterflies that we tagged. We had less OE tests, and I'm not entirely sure why, but oh, I know, because a lot of the butterflies that we tagged were actually from the raised ones, and they hadn't been in the environment long enough, so we didn't tag them. And then again, but the ones we did test for OE, no positive tests. Last year, we tagged 131 butterflies and submitted our OE test, and we had that one positive test from last year, but that's the only one. Now I know, well, I can't submit this test, but I know I have OE here. So this is a little bit of a different situation, but I'll keep notes on that. We also tend to raise about 30 a year, mostly in partnership with the Hill at White Marsh. So staff and residents there help us raise them. Typically we collect eggs and caterpillars such that they will become adult butterflies at a date at which they can be tagged, so that they contribute to our tagging efforts without having to go out and collect those as adult butterflies flying in the field, which is a lot harder. Plus the staff and the residents at the Hill absolutely love this and badger me at the beginning of every summer about when are we going to get our caterpillars, because we can't wait to have our caterpillars back. And so they do a pretty good job. This year we didn't tag. The COVID situations just made it difficult. Obviously you can imagine the residents at the Hill are in one of the higher risk categories, most of them. So we try to limit our exposure and their exposure to us, and it was quite the gauntlet to get through the front door there. So we dropped off caterpillars and they raised them, and we called it a day, so that they could still participate in the project this year. But we also had a couple foster caterpillars that we took from somebody who had milkweed, a small amount of milkweed in their yard that the monarchs decided they were going to lay all their eggs on. And the caterpillars literally ate all the leaves off of the milkweed that they had. So we are happy to serve as foster parents if you run out of milkweed. We are also happy to point you in a direction of where you might be able to go wild collect milkweed in a way that wouldn't interfere with any of the studies that we have going on. So if you're raising monarchs and you run out of milkweed, please give me a shout, because I'm happy to help. This year was the first year that we did the monarch larval monitoring project, and like I said, it was really difficult. There's almost 600 plants out there, and it was really hard for me to do this by myself. So I am looking for new volunteers to help me with this next year, and there's a variety of different ways that you can participate. So what can you do? First and foremost, plant milkweed. This is probably by far one of the things that is the easiest to do, number one, and will help monarchs no matter what. They need milkweed. Without milkweed, they won't survive. So all of the other things being equal, we need to get more milkweed stems out there in our part of the country. The Midwest is working on their part of the country. There's a lot of partnerships out there with a lot of the monarch organizations and farmers to try to get them to plant milkweed in fallow fields for a year, to plant hedgerows between their fields of native wildflowers, and really work to protect those corridors from any kind of herbicides and pesticides that they potentially could be using on their fields. And so this is by far the easiest and best thing that you can do. The other thing that you can do is plant a variety of nectar plants. These nectar plants are going to support way more than just monarchs, and that's really important as well. A lot of the other pollinators use these nectar plants as well. And particularly for monarchs, monarchs are not the only butterfly that we have that migrates through our area. American ladies, painted ladies, buckeyes, they all migrate through our area. They just don't go as far as the monarchs do in the same way. They go down to the southern United States, into Florida and along the Gulf Coast, and spend the winter there. So it's not quite as monumental a migration, but there are other migrating butterflies. So you want to make sure that you have blooms that cover the whole season. So from early spring to October. And the best way to do that is a variety of different kinds of plants. This is goldenrod down here in the corner. This is one of the staples of migrating monarch butterflies because it blooms at the right time of the year in our area. And just an aside, this isn't what causes your allergies in the fall. Ragweed looks like goldenrod, also blooms at the same time. That's what's causing your allergies. So planting goldenrod in your yard shouldn't contribute to your fall allergies anymore, because usually it's the ragweed that's the problem. Things like Joe Pieweed down here, they're another favorite and tend to be late summer, early fall bloomers. Asters, ironweed, those as well. This is butterfly weed here in the middle. And we made the point earlier, and I do have a slide that I'm happy to share in a minute about butterfly bush. This is butterfly weed. So this is a milkweed. It's orange, it's much different. Swamp milkweed, this is swamp milkweed here that this butterfly is on. You can see it's very narrow leaves. Common milkweed has very broad, wide leaves. They both have pink flowers, and the butterfly weed has the narrow leaves like the swamp milkweed, but orange flowers. So again, you want to cover that gamut of time. Don't spray. It's bad for all of us, and it's definitely bad for the insects. And herbicides aren't necessarily any better. I mean, they're not going to outright kill the insects, but they can kill the plants that the insects need. So again, very, very judicious uses, and be aware of the potential side effects. Volunteer, come help us. This is so the easiest way to tell me that you want to help in terms of Monarch projects or any of the other citizen science projects that you will see on the website when you go on there, is to fill out the volunteer form on our website. This gets it into the right database that makes sure that I get you on the right mailing list so that you're aware of training opportunities or potential volunteer opportunities where we just do training in the field as we go along. So I'm just going to say really quickly, on our website, go to the Take Action tab, click on the volunteer section. Ignore the COVID warning. We're not onboarding new volunteers right now, but there will be opportunities next year, even if we still have to do some things virtually. And a lot of this kind of stuff is, you know, out dispersed in field areas. So it's possible to do this sort of no matter what happens in some cases. So scroll down the page and to the section that says Citizen Science and Creek Watch. You can click on a document to see all the citizen science projects that we have, or you can just click on the Get Started button, and that'll take you to a Google form to fill out. All I would ask is that you put in the comments section that you're interested in Monarch projects or any other specific project, but since we're talking about Monarchs, that will make sure I get you on the proper mailing list for training opportunities or volunteer opportunities. We try to put those things on social media as best we can, but sometimes with other things that have to go on social media for other reasons, they get missed. So please, 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 if you're interested in this, please go fill out that form, and in the comment section, write, I want to help with Monarchs, and I will make sure that you get notified when we have projects coming up. And then the last thing that you can do is go on to Journey North and sign up, and it's a free account, and you can enter your sightings of migrating monarchs, of roosts. You can put in monarchs in the spring as well, which is also really helpful. And when they come back to your area, when the first time you see them in your yard or whatever it is, and you can use that to help track. And I do look at that. I go and look and see if there's any other people from the area that are putting monarch sightings in. So your using that is really helpful, even to me, and it's certainly helpful to the researchers that are looking at the grand sort of continental scale of monarch activities. And really quick, I'm going to stop for questions, but one, I'm going to talk about butterfly bush because I threw this in here because I had a feeling it would come up. It usually does. This is butterfly bush. There's a variety of different colors of blooms, white, pink, purple, red, but this is what it looks like. It's sort of these long candlestick blooms. This is not a native plant. This is actually an invasive plant in a lot of areas, and particularly invasive along waterways. So areas along the creek are a potential for this to spread. It escapes people's yards. And the reason it escapes people's yards is because the seeds spread. So this is not a host plant for butterflies, so no butterflies will land on this to eat the leaves, mostly because it's not native to our area. They don't know what it is. It provides nectar only. And there is some concern that the nectar that it provides, well, it can be a magnet for butterflies for sure, isn't the same quality as the nectar that butterflies or other insects would get from our native plants. So the carbohydrate and protein levels are very different, and it may not be as nutritious as our native plants will provide. So my goal to you is to say, I don't recommend this for planting in your yard. Even if you see something in the nursery that says this is a new sterile variety of this and it won't spread and it won't do that. We have so many plants growing on our preserves right now that started out as sterile varieties that were sold by nurseries that are now invading our preserves and our natural areas, and not just Wissahickon Trails natural areas, all natural areas. Bradford pears are the biggest culprit of this. They're not, you know, when they were originally sold, they were a fast growing tree. They had pretty white flowers. They looked nice next to your house and they didn't grow pears. Guess what? Now they do. And the birds eat them and they spread them everywhere. So, and that's the same with this. Now, this isn't, the birds aren't eating these seeds. These are wind dispersed seeds. If you have this in your yard now, I'm not suggesting you have to take it out. It's fine. Make the commitment to deadhead the flowers. So as the flower stalks are dying, like in this lower picture here, even before they get to this point a little bit, I would say cut them off. Dispose of them in a heavy trash bag where they're not going to sprout in some other place as a dead seed falls out of there. And don't put them in your compost bin because the seeds might survive in your compost bin and then you'll replant that and spread, you know, butterfly bush everywhere. So that's my soapbox lecture on butterfly bush. Sorry, but it's not the best thing that you can have in your yard. All those other native plants are going to attract butterflies just as much and be much more beneficial for lots of things in the environment, not just providing nectar in the fall or in the summer. So, okay, I'll back up here. I saw a couple questions pop up, so let's see where we're at. Okay, somebody said it seemed like the monarchs were later, but as you said, but weren't their numbers also fewer? So yes, that seems to be the case this year. And there's a lot of natural fluctuation from year to year. So last year was actually not a great year for monarchs in our area either. That was more due to the fact that we had a very cold, wet spring. So the early butterflies didn't breed very well, so our populations didn't do as well. This year seems to be more that, first of all, the number of wintering monarchs was lower than the year before. So there were less that came out of Mexico and started that first round of breeding in Texas to make the generation that moves further north and so on and so forth. So when you start with lower numbers of monarchs from Mexico, overall, typically the whole population is going to be somewhat depressed for the year. There were also, if I'm remembering correctly this year, there were storms that happened as that first and second generation were happening in Georgia, Tennessee, like the middle part of their migratory, northward migratory path, or generation hopping, I should say. It's not really migration because it's each subsequent generation moves a little bit further north. They didn't breed as well in those areas, so there were less butterflies to come to our area from that generation. So in our area, yes, they were late and there was less of them. Now the Midwest, from what I understand, and the upper Midwest has actually had a great year this year for monarchs. And I'm curious to see some of the numbers. I haven't seen, you know, obviously we're in the middle of migration right now, so I haven't really seen good numbers on tags or roosts. I have heard of some roosts forming, big roosts already in the Michigan area. So again, it varies year to year, and there's lots of very local conditions that can impact that as well. It's possible that we will get a decent number of migrants from Canada that we kind of got skipped a little bit, but the butterflies may have moved further north than us, and their offspring will be coming back through immigration. So fingers crossed that things are going to pick up here for the migratory part, you know, soon. Let's see. I think there was a couple other questions. Let's see here. Somebody asked about the nectar from zinnias. Yes, absolutely fine. That is the one non-native plant that I would say absolutely plant as many as you want. They are a butterfly magnet. Their nectar seems to be a little bit closer in composition to some of our native plants, and they're annuals. So they don't survive our winters, and they're really easy to grow from seed. So you can plant those every year. Just start them again from seed and let them go. And they don't seem to be any kind of an invasive problem at all. Warming weather in our area, I don't know, we'll see. But I seriously doubt. They're typically an annual plant anyway, not like our other perennial plants. So I don't see them being as much of an issue, even if they started some so-called escaping our yards. But I must always recommend zinnias as a fall plant. The butterflies love them, and that is a surefire way to try to attract some of the migrating butterflies, also the monarchs, but also the other three that I mentioned, the painted lady, the American lady, and the buckeye. Another question pop up here. Yes, they really do love it. So, and a comment on the bridge at Briar Hill. Yes, we are so happy that the bridge at Briar Hill is done. For those who aren't familiar, Briar Hill is one of our preserves that doesn't get a lot of love because it was actually kind of hard to get into, especially if the creek was at all. Actually, it's a tributary. It's not the creek itself, but if the tributary in there was high at all, it was very difficult to access the trails. So there is a new bridge there. It is finally open. So I encourage you to go on our website and look for how to access our Briar Hill Preserve and go take a look. We're in the process of adding some new trails on the backside of that. We had acquired a property last summer that we're adding trails, and so there's lots of areas to explore over there that a lot of people really haven't seen very much of. So please enjoy. Oh, 12 people, nice. Well, I'm glad to hear that because, like I said, it's not one we get it gets a lot of love. So anyway, that is all I have for tonight. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. If you want to help with the Monarch projects, please fill out the volunteer form online, and yeah, keep us in mind for next year and some ways that you can help. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And